Hello. Thank you for that. How lovely. Good evening. I'm Richard Aedy from Radio National. Welcome to the Gallery of Modern Art in Brisbane for the last in the series of GoMA Talks, which has been running in conjunction with the gallery's current exhibition, Surrealism, the Poetry of Dreams. And I was particularly pleased that we had running in conjunction with that exhibition, because it means that no matter how odd the question, it will be in context. It will be surreal. This one is called Young Minds, What's in Store for Our Creative Future? And to address this question, and indeed to answer it definitively, we have a panel of 4 creative young minds and one middle-aged one trying to keep up. I will bring them up in a moment so that you can welcome them properly. But before I do, if you want to ask a question, I should say there are a couple of ways of doing that. You can do it via Twitter, if you're on Twitter, and that's whether you're in the room or watching the webcast. And all you have to do, you have to remember the hashtag, which is GoMA Talks, which is all one word. And it has to be sufficiently interesting and incisive and otherwise brilliant to pique my interest, and it will come here. And then, frankly, you face another hurdle, because it has to be interesting and incisive and brilliant, but not too interesting, incisive and brilliant, because I don't want to look bad. So if you think Goldilocks, not too hard, not too soft, not too hot, not too cold, not too interesting, incisive and brilliant, not too uninteresting, stupid and dull, it will be just right. That's the Twitter. You can also ask a question if you're in the room by grabbing our attention. In about 20 minutes, and I'll try and signal just beforehand too, I will pause the discussion and you'll have an opportunity. We have microphones, we'll get one to you. And then about 20 minutes after that, we'll do it all over again. All right, let's get the panel up here. I'll start on my right and your left. Jane Morley is a fashion designer, commentator, consultant and lecturer at the Queensland University of Technology, where she's also doing a master's because she's not busy enough. She is particularly interested in issues of design and sustainability. Alan Huynh is former youth chair of the Federation of Ethnic Communities Councils of Australia and vice chair youth of the Ethnic Communities Councils of Queensland, and he's also a doctor doing his residency. Tom Woodruff is a foreign affairs analyst who's currently teaching and reading for his honours thesis at the University of Melbourne. Tom's also the co-founder of the left-right think tank, which specifically aims to involve young people in public policy. And Anastasia Close is an artist. She works in video, performance and installation. Her work's been included in this gallery, actually in the exhibition 21st Century Art in the First Decade, and more recently at this year's Venice Biennale. She has the distinction of having pissed off Andrew Bolt no end. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome her. Anastasia, as the artist here, you are going to get surrealism questions. I think it's only fair.
Oh, no.
So, transform the world, said Marx. Change life, said Rimbaud. These two orders are for us one and the same. Andre Breton said that. What are you trying to do?
I guess I'm trying to communicate with people, which I think is something that artists have always done, always sought to do. I'm trying to move people and, I guess, express myself.
I want to get right to the heart of what you do.
Yeah.
So can you take me in about a minute from idea to the work?
Okay. I guess when it comes to making a work of art, I do often get a moment of divine inspiration, if you could call it that. I have a certain feeling or a certain vision that I'm deeply curious about, and that curiosity, I think, compels me forward to actually make the work of art. But there's always an element of unknowability about the work of art itself. It's not as if it's predetermined or illustrative of an idea. There's a sort of a mystery there.
And do you end up with what you think you'll end up with? When you start, you have an idea and you end up, is that it?
I think I don't know what I'll end up with. I have a sense in which I want the audience to feel a certain thing about the work. And if I make it and I feel that about the work, then that for me is a success. But certainly it's not always successful.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, come back to you. It is easy to see the creative process in making art, but Tom, you're thinking about foreign policy, you're thinking about politics. How do you inject the creativity into that?
I think the first part, I mean, when we started Left Right Think Tank, and these days I'm just an outdated board member, but it was all about, I guess, looking for niche areas. So, you know, the question always came up, are you left or right? And often the proof is in the pudding. So to avoid being stereotyped or tagged as left of centre or right of centre, we would look for areas where basically there was no debate about an issue, or an issue where one particular element of it was so heavily debated, but another angle of it was not debated at all. So we were looking at niche areas in that sense.
All right, I'll come back to that too. But Jane, your work is focused on design, but I mentioned your interest in sustainability. Fashion, with its emphasis on now, and I think you only have to look at me to see how up to the minute I am, seems to be the opposite of sustainable. How do you reconcile that?
I think that's one of the key things that has concerned my current position in QUT. Before then, I was working in the industry where you're sort of chasing your tail and just trying to churn out collections season by season, but having the luxury to step back and really have a look at going forward and what we might need in designers of the future, we realised that with these very creative consumers we see now, we sort of have to, there's a focus on designers really trying to challenge things and question the way we do things, not just do things the way they've always seeming to be done. And part of that will be sort of tailoring the creative process against the challenges that we will be facing in terms of, say, population growth, the fact that we'll need to be able to grow more food rather than crops to create more clothes, and how we'll actually come up with creative solutions and products to satisfy these consumers but still take into consideration these challenges we'll be facing.
Well, there's some people who've done some interesting work on that, and I want to explore it a bit more later, but I want to bring you in, Alan. You're doing your residency at the moment, which means that you have to be enormously creative with your time management to do anything else at all. How do you manage it?
Well, I think working in a hospital is working in a very intense, very pressurised environment. And in order to get any satisfaction out of anything you want to do outside of that working environment, you sort of have to really believe in what you're doing and sort of value the contribution that you're making. A lot of the stuff that I do outside of my professional career is voluntary. And I do believe that what I'm doing there is creating some value for people that I'm working with. Yeah.
Well, one of the things you're doing is getting other young people to inspire others to make change. So how do you do that?
I think you have to realise that a lot of young people come into the world and they sort of see the world as a place that's quite hostile, in the sense that they seem to believe that young people are stereotyped as being apathetic, not willing to contribute, not having anything to contribute. And you sort of have to also realise that these young people are quite enthusiastic. They're skilled and they're experienced in what they do and what they're interested in. So you have to nurture that, you have to extract that, and you have to be able to put it in a way to them that they see what they're doing as creating value as well.
Can I add to that? Can I say this kind of notion that young people are apathetic? I find it strange because I don't think that's actually the core issue that's in the way of young people who are trying to make change. And I don't think it's so much the role of young people who are volunteering in other young people's causes to inspire them, so much as it is simply just to provide a platform. Young people are just as engaged as they've ever been. And I similarly don't buy into the argument that young people are necessarily more engaged today than they've ever been. I mean, if you look 30, 40 years ago, the Vietnam War movement was an enormous movement of, the anti-Vietnam War movement was an enormous movement of young people. It's just the paradigm has shifted. It shifted from, in my view, largely university-centric movements, so campus politics, where most of the current politicians began their careers, and things like the Vietnam War movement, to more entrepreneurial things. So you see young people these days starting their own organisations or running their own campaigns. And the second major shift is that they're becoming more cause-focused. So they're looking much more at single issues like the environment or the rights of, particular members of an ethnic community, or, in my case, the views of young people in foreign affairs particularly. So I think this kind of notion that they're apathetic is a little bit strange, because the biggest barrier, I think, is actually this proliferation of the term young people itself.
Actually, you get me onto a good point, Tom, because I'm much happier if all of you are saying the phrase young people than if I do. And it goes back to about 5 or 6 years ago. I gave a speech, I've forgotten for whom, but afterwards my host said, "Oh, I have to tell you something." She said, "I was in the loo and there was a young woman on the phone in there going, 'Oh, there's a guy here from the ABC who's been going on about young people all evening.'" So now I'm very careful about saying young people. Jane, I want to come back to you. Can you make the case that fashion is more than a constantly changing consumerism, but actually a force for good, especially for young people?
Oh, it can definitely be a force for good. I mean, we see fashion sometimes as, keeping up with the Joneses, or something that has to, constantly be changing, or the media might manipulate us into buying certain things. But it's also a very creative form of expression. And it's also something we can actually bond with people over. It's not necessarily just about consuming, isn't it? Sometimes it's about the experience of shopping with your friends, or the experience of making something together. So it doesn't necessarily have to have so many negative connotations. It's just that the speed of fashion and the amount that we consume, and the way that companies are conspiring to sort of give us more and more products to sort of desire, has started to give it that kind of attitude. But I think there's a lot of companies starting to emerge now which are sort of encouraging people to buy less, buy less and actually commit to things for longer. And there's lots of smaller labels that are coming out to do that sort of thing.
How well do you think young buyers understand where their clothes come from, why they're so cheap, how tough the conditions are for the people who make them?
Well, the good news is that a lot of programs are starting to come up even from a primary school and secondary education level, and it's filtering throughout most of courses in the creative industries and business and those sorts of aspects. And we find our students are actually incredibly eager, and I do agree there isn't a knowledge out there of where products come from. You see tags on clothing saying handmade, and you think, oh, but I think people are under the impression that you put a roll of fabric into a big machine and put a design in there and it spits it out at the other end, but there are still people at the other end, cutting out your fabric, sewing it together, picking the cotton, dyeing it. It's not a mechanised process. So I think it is really important for young people to see where things are coming from, so that they can make more conscious choices when they're in the driver's seat of making these products themselves.
We have a Twitter question from We Means Yes. What are we defining as young here? Speaking as somebody who's 47, I think if you're under 40, you're travelling pretty well. But I don't know if we'll go to the core of that. Tom, you've written about fashion and politicians. It's not a long article.
Well, in my defence, I wrote an article about the male politicians' fashion, to try and defend against all the criticism of Julia's fashion.
Well, no, I think there was a bit in there about that, wasn't there?
Well, I was trying to make the point that before she became Prime Minister, there was about 6 outfits that you could almost, if you watched politics enough, you could actually almost pick them out, whereas now she's got an enormous amount of outfits, including a whole wardrobe of white jackets, I suppose. But I was trying to make the point that the male politicians is outrageously worse. I mean, if you look at half the front bench and on both sides has this crazy obsession with wearing R.M. Williams boots. Stephen Smith's haircut looks like he's been electrocuted. Half of them wear suits that look like they're their suits from their high school graduation. The whole range of fashion mistakes, in my opinion, but anyway,
I don't think I've ever seen Stephen Smith's hair move, but that may be something else. I want to come back to something you said before about, you don't buy the young people, he says self-consciously, as being apathetic. And I think you're right. I've met some really impressive young people, vitally interested in politics, and some of them even in policy. But if there are to be more of you, how are they going to be engaged? Is it social media?
Well, I think social media is it's a common thing that people fall to as a kind of maybe explanation of how people are engaged. And obviously there's great technology like we have in front of us with Twitter streaming this, but I don't think necessarily that just because there's more young people it means that necessarily the amount that will be involved is going to be less. It just means that there'll be probably more opportunities out there that they create themselves, which is a lot of what they're doing in these days.
Actually, Ben 11 says Julia looks good in the Australian flag, at least. Alan, how do you use the web and social media to get your message across and get more people interested?
Social media has revolutionised the way we communicate. It's given access to people who wouldn't otherwise have access to opportunities and create awareness of opportunities that they wouldn't otherwise be aware of. What it has done, though, it's sort of given people an easy way out. So, they have an interest in poverty, they have an interest in climate change. Someone starts a group, we support climate change. If you like it, click this. And that's the extent of their contribution. They don't really get a deeper understanding of the issue. They don't really want to engage in debate about the issue. They don't really want to get into the crux of it and trying to come up with actual solutions, tangible solutions that help to resolve the problem. So it's good and bad. It's created awareness, but it's also, I think, made people a bit more placid.
But you can leverage it. I mean, the whole Get Up thing, that is really almost what they began with, getting people interested in things, but they ask for money. They say, what do you want us to care about? They recruit people that way. So they've found a way of, and they started before social media was really going, but they found a way of using the web in a more activist way.
Again, they claim to have a certain number of members.
Claim. Interesting
I'm
word.
not part of the organisation, so I don't know. But a lot of those members are financial members, and they donate a certain amount. And it's a similar model for a lot of organisations. People pay a certain amount of money, and they sign up to members. And you question how active these people are in terms of participating in understanding the issues and really getting into it, as opposed to just signing or
Liking.
Yeah, liking or putting in a credit card number and so on. For me, when I look at an issue, I try to understand as much as possible. Try and find other people who are interested in the issue and sort of engage in some sort of dialogue and some sort of debate about the issue, just to really see what it is about. And you really question whether social media has had the positive effect that people claim it has.
All right.
But the other interesting aspect of Get Up, and Alan's right, I mean, membership of Get Up is counted as signing up to their newsletter, but which is not to degrade at all the work that they do, which I think is phenomenal. But Get Up's average age is I think over 40. It's between 40 and 60 somewhere. It's actually quite it's an older movement than I think a lot of people assume. But I think the answer really is that social media is basically a tool. It's not necessarily something that's changed the number of people engaged. It's just another tool to get messages out there. With the Arab Spring, someone said, and I thought it was quite an accurate way of putting it, that Facebook sets the date, Twitter gets the crowds together, and YouTube shows the world, which is probably a very pointed way of putting it.
Anastasia, you're an enthusiastic user of technology to make your art. Thinking about visual art, it's moved from drawing and painting to collage and these days video and new media. What will it do next?
Well, it's a question I can't possibly answer, but I will say that the pendulum is always swinging, and I think people will at some point experience a digital fatigue and actually want to see drawing and sculpture and things that have been made by the artist's own hands, I suspect.
So a kind of return to, because interesting, we have a question here from Lee and Neil. To what extent are young people rediscovering old values like handicraft, retro computing? I don't know what retro
computing is. People are endlessly
is.
rediscovering old values and parading them as new, I suspect.
I want to come back to something that you said, and in a minute I'll invite you to ask questions. We're coming up to our first pause for, I'm hoping, some really terrific and erudite questions from you. But I want to go back to something Tom said about the Arab Spring, because it occurred to me that you need those social media tools, but you need a lot of young people who've got no skin in they have nothing to lose. They're not part of the status quo. You can't do it with a bunch of get-ups, essentially. You can't be all 40 to 65. You need the young people who are not part of the establishment and really almost have nothing to lose.
Yeah, maybe to some extent. I mean, I think there's an argument perhaps that, you know, a critical mass delivers impact, but in order to get that critical mass, and whether that impact is measured by perhaps how many people take notice, it doesn't necessarily need to be young. And you see that at the moment, I think, domestically at least, with you know, these the protests against the carbon tax. But you know, when you look at the Arab Spring, there was huge groupings of people that weren't quite simply young people. I mean, women played an enormous part in this revolution, particularly in countries where previously they weren't even allowed to protest. Let alone do things like drive. So I think there's a whole spectrum of, perhaps, if you will, sort of, you know, interest groups or, you know, minority groups that played a part, and bringing them together was, I think, what caused the critical mass, not necessarily one by itself.
Yes, I'm struck by the Saudi Arabian situation where the king has announced that within 4 years, they're not going to rush into it, women will be allowed to vote and stand in municipal elections, but they cannot drive. All right, I'm going to call a temporary halt to proceedings for a few minutes so that you can ask some questions. And if you want to tweet and you haven't already, remember the hashtag is GoMA Talks, that's one word. If you want to put your hand up, we'll get a microphone to you. And just on that, when you're asking a question, ask a question rather than, I'm sure you wouldn't do this, but I have been to other things where people don't ask questions, they get up and show off for a bit. I'm sure none of that will happen today. Also, try and keep them as short as you can, because other people may have questions too, which may be almost as good as yours. And if you do go on too long, I'll interrupt you, which would be embarrassing for both of us. So, questions. It's quite hard to see, actually. Yes. I feel like I'm on the prow of a ship, looking for... Yes, we have one down the front in the middle, and we are getting a microphone to him.
Thanks. Okay, question. If we are such a creative society or state, how much should religion play a part?
Who wants to take that, do you think? It's a matter of trying to get them to form an orderly queue on this one.
Supposedly it shouldn't, but it always seems to be playing a secret major hand. But question to you.
To me? Yes. Tom, do you want to have a crack at it?
I'm happy to incorporate into, I think, what is a wider creative answer, which is, I think when you look at the field I'm interested in really is creative ideas these days within how the world's diplomacy is structured. You know, so diplomacy is the second oldest occupation, arguably, in the world, yet the way we practice diplomacy hasn't changed much over that period. But one of the ways that I think it should change is that we need to get out of this kind of Westphalian-esque approach of looking at diplomacy as between states and other states, and look at it at a much broader level that includes a whole range of different actors. It should include, for example, religious groups. It should include NGOs, what I'd call celebrity diplomats like Angelina Jolie or Bill Gates. I mean, Bill Gates contributes 1/3 of the World Health Organization's budget, and probably has more of an impact on the World Health agenda than the WHO does. You know, so to include a whole range of groups in that, and I think certainly religious groups is one of those.
Anyone else got a response to that?
I guess we could, pardon me, maybe think of it more in like a broader cultural sense, in that I suppose social media and the internet has sort of started to play a part in the globalisation of fashion and sort of this seeming homogenisation where we go shopping in any city in the world and we see the McDonald's of shopping chains with Zara's and, you know, H&M's and all these sorts of things, and maybe we haven't got such a sense of place and space and culture in the clothing that we wear. And it'll be really interesting to see, I mean, one beautiful thing about the internet is it has enabled communities from across the world to talk to each other and find synergies. So perhaps in this future we do start to think more about the people who are involved in the production of our clothes and are involved in consuming our clothes, and we get different countries such as China and India starting to be some of the most powerful consumers in the world, whether we will start to see a more diverse array of products and the different influences they bring. So there's already designers such as Easton Pearson who perhaps use some of the local traditional embroideries and the sorts of artefacts that people produce in areas and incorporating it into their designs to sort of, make a mark of the people who are involved in the creative process with them. So I don't know if that helps to answer your question, but we might see these sorts of things filtering in.
I feel it was tangential to the question at best, but however. So we have another question. Is there anyone else out there? I'm peering. Now, there's one up the back, and there's some more up front, and there's some more at the back.
Does fashion influence communication of policy?
Actually, I suppose in some ways it does, which is interesting. Hopefully more and more we'll start to see legislation coming about through fashion. At the moment there's a lot of blank spots, especially in Australian legislation. The European Union and have been a little bit more active in the ideas of getting some of damaging chemicals and sort of working conditions and things like that, and working with some countries who are involved in it to actually make sure that products which don't use chemicals and working practices which are damaging people in other countries, to make sure they're not being consumed in Europe. But we're a little bit behind in Australia in that sense, but hopefully we'll start to see it coming through. So hopefully we'll start to see government actually legislating a more comprehensive set of standards that companies need to adhere to. When we look at buying food products and things like that, we're much more aware of what goes into the products that we buy, whereas when we're buying a fashion garment, we have no idea the extensive chemicals that went into it, or the amount of people that may have died from pesticide poisoning to do with this garment. So hopefully we'll start to see rating systems imposed by the government that will start to make it a little bit more transparent for consumers. Does that help to answer?
I think we'll have one more, and then I'll get going again, because I'm slightly conscious of the time. So I did see other hands both up and down. Oh, I saw that man first.
Hi. We talked a lot about creativity today, and creative people, creative class, creative workers. How would you define creativity in our contemporary society today?
You go for it, Anastasia.
Well, it's a very broad term. Speaking personally, it's sort of like my religion, if you could call it that. I think the role of creativity, it's about imparting to people a sense of the importance of the imagination. I'm interested in broadening people's imagination and allowing them to think in different ways, encouraging their mind to move in different directions. I think the beautiful thing about imagination is that it allows you to consider the world from other people's perspectives, and that's something that we can't have enough of today, I think, and why I think art is so exciting. I don't know if that's answered it. How do I define creativity? Well, that's certainly what I do.
Good. I'm going to ask you a question now.
Okay.
And we'll come back to more of yours a bit later on. So, surrealists.
Yes. Oh no.
Were fascinated with sex and unconscious desire, and often the grittier end of the subject. And now, you've received some attention for your work in the toilets with Ben, for which you videoed yourself having sex with a fellow art student in the disabled loos of the Victorian College of the Arts. This is where you annoyed Mr. Bolt. Why did you do it?
Well, there are personal reasons why I did it, but I don't think we need to go into them here necessarily.
Because Ben's a bit of all right?
Ben was someone I was studying with at the Victorian College of the Arts. We were both doing our honours year. And
you couldn't get extra credit like that when I was at university.
And I tell you what, it took a lot of courage. I will say that, because I didn't tell anyone that I was going to do it. And when I approached Ben, I said, look, would you consider doing this? I'm at this, I think personally I've come to the perfect moment in my life where I can do a work like this, and it will be symbolic and significant for me personally, and it could make a really interesting artwork, because Ben and I did not have a sexual relationship. We were friends. We used to, have a coffee together at lunchtime, that kind of thing. And Ben, being the wonderful, generous soul that he is, decided to put himself in my hands, as it were. and we made a video one lunchtime. I said, I'll meet you at the disabled toilets at 12 o'clock tomorrow. And I was in there waiting with the camera, and I heard a knock on the door, and I opened the door, and Ben came in. And I turned the video on, and yeah.
You then followed this up by making another film, Mum and I Watch in the Toilets with Ben.
Yeah.
This had the effect of parents of children who grew up to become accountants become more profoundly grateful than they ever had before. It is pretty uncomfortable stuff.
It was very uncomfortable. I think I really had to do something unbearable, because it wasn't enough just to show a sex film. I mean, who cares, right? I was like, how can I turn this into an interesting work of art? The best way to do that is to put myself on the line and do something unthinkable, which is to sit on a couch with my mother and press record on the video camera and have our our expressions recorded while this video was playing on the TV at home in the lounge room. So I did it, and Mum had little idea what she was in for. And to her credit, she's a very generous person. She's an artist as well. So I think her comments when she was watching the video, she said things like, "Darling, you forgot to shave your armpits," and "Darling, are you wearing my bra?" And I actually was wearing her bra. So, I mean, she was very concerned with the aesthetic dimensions of the video, the sex video.
Yes. Alan, don't be frightened. I'm going to ask you something completely different. How hard has it been for you to achieve what you have so far? Because I'm wondering if your age has helped or hindered in the success of the work that you do with communities and young people.
Yeah, a bit of both, I think. I think when you work with people who are, and youth, sort of, how you define youth. If you define it in terms of age, it's under 25. In Australia, the UN defines it as under 24. The Commonwealth's under 30. Some countries it's under 45. So
I like those countries.
So youth is quite relative, and age is just a figure. But when you work with people, young people who are younger than yourself, so for example, I do quite a bit of work with high school students. It helps that I can empathise with them a lot more. It helps that I am able to understand a lot of the stuff that they go through a lot more, and don't come to issues with a sort of a parental frame of mind. It's also been a hindrance in a sense that, again, sort of going back to the point about stereotypes, and I do think there is a stereotype with young people, particularly media portrayal of young people, and you sort of see the stories that are published in newspapers and online and so on, and you sort of have that immediate association with, this person is this age, this person must be this. So it's been a hindrance in that sense.
Tom, I don't want to harp on about the age thing. How old are you now?
22.
22. So that's 3 years younger than I was when you were born. And the point about that, apart from making me want to weep uncontrollably, is that you are working on getting young people engaged with political issues, but most of those issues are dealt with by people my age and older. So how do you ensure that people your age and younger are being heard?
Right. Yeah, great question. So when we started Left Right, I mean, it was actually an issue we grappled with, because we basically found that as we didn't want to be a think tank of young people's issues. We wanted to be a think tank, quite simply, of young people. But then we kind of found that there was ways to basically maximise your impact, which is you take a generational outlook on issues. So when you look at, say, the role of innovation in the country, you look at it with a sort of a 50-year time frame. So basically you are then the decision makers in that period. So we basically enthused that throughout.
Jane, as well as being young, you're educating young people. How do you think education is changing? Are young people being taught different things and therefore being more active in areas like social change?
I think one thing that we seem resigned to is the fact that we can't teach them all the skills they need for the future. We don't have all the answers. So what I find that we're focusing more on is more of an outlook and a skill base that helps deal with the changes they're going to experience throughout their career, because there'll be jobs that exist that we have no idea about. So we can't possibly prepare them for that, but we can help them with the process of research and how they can analyse the world and look at what's happening and then integrate that with their practice and their ideals to come up with creative solutions in whatever may arise in the future, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Alan, you're still going through your lengthy medical education. How do you see this?
I see it as learning rather than education, and learning, it doesn't stop. And I think when you give young people that sense that learning isn't supposed to be restrictive, it's not supposed to be a set number of years, it's not supposed to be textbooks and lectures. If you're creative with learning and you get people to think beyond academic education and sort of think about life skills, think about critical thinking, thinking about innovative ways of communicating, thinking about ways that they can express themselves, not in an essay or in a video, or sort of not constrain how they express themselves. I think you present education in a much more positive way. And I think the trend now is towards education that's more experiential. So people get a lot out of volunteering, or they get a lot out of community service, out of learning a language, out of applying a skill, and not just from textbooks and sort of lectures and so on. So you sort of see a trend towards that now, and not only do employers recognise that and they see the development of life skills within young people are also recognising that their CV is not just a GPA or what they've been employed as part-time whilst going through university and high school, but also all the extracurricular activities they do. Whether they've led a student society, whether they've started their own organisation, whether they've launched a project, and so on. And these activities also give young people a set of skills that they can apply outside the professional environment as well.
Tom, you're still beavering away on honours, aren't you?
Very much. It's due in 2 weeks, actually.
So you must have thoughts about this as well.
Yeah, I, to a lot of criticism actually, at the end of last year, floated an idea through the ABC's online service actually that I thought, I completely agree with Alan. I think education in not just this country but in large part across the world is not based so much on learning outside of the classroom. I think it's one of the areas that we need much more innovation in. We still do crazy things like industrial revolution age-esque things of grouping people by their year of manufacture. Schools are designed to be like factories. They have bells that ring when you're meant to go to the next place. They pump out people. They don't group people based on what they want to do necessarily. So I think the whole education system needs a big revamp. And I was suggesting in that particular article, one of the ways to do that is basically to create a bit more of competition between private education and public education in Australia, as a publicly educated boy myself, by basically making a sort of HEC-style loan scheme affordable for private education, meaning that basically parents could vote on their feet as to where their students went, which would inevitably cause competition, because parents might still want to keep their kids in public school, and that's fine. But if you create the opportunity for anyone, regardless of socioeconomic circumstance, to go to private education, then it creates competition.
I'm going to come to you in a moment, Anastasia, but I'm going to ask the surrealist question to Alan in a moment. But before I do, so you can prepare yourself, Jane, you, as an educator, how do you feel you can create change? What sort of messages are you communicating to the students?
Well, I think there's a sense of, as you said previously, just giving them a space to think about where things are coming from. So, question what's behind that product that I'm buying or producing, and question the way that we see as normal, and having the bravery to actually follow their own path. So giving them a supportive environment to actually try and blossom in that way, and also to think in an interdisciplinary way, which is something that QUT is especially keen on. So to actually realise that to solve these challenging problems of the future, they may have to have synergies with the scientific community, or they may have to have synergies with architectural specialists, or people who work in community development. So then they're going to be going across borders, and it's giving them the research skills and also the confidence to actually foray into those areas. So I hope that that's where we're having a difference, where we can give them the confidence to actually explore the areas they need to.
Alan, most of us see the Surrealists as this tight-knit, formally organised group that banded together to get their voices heard and offer alternate ways of approaching the world. Are there challenges working independently in your fields? Or are organised groups always more effective?
It depends on the objective you're trying to achieve. I think if your goal is something that you can do as an individual and you have the capacity to do it as an individual, then working independently is the way to go. Because when you bring in others who share your ideas but have a different approach, then you'll have to compromise. Equally though, working in a group, an organised group, you're in a better position to leverage that mass. You're in a position to get insights from a range of people. So pros and cons, both sides. Again, it goes back to your objective.
Okay. I'm going to ask Anastasia a question, and then we'll open the floor again for you. I've tried to make up a bit of time because I'm anxious not to keep you here longer, even though we started a bit later. But Anastasia, you were telling us the story before of an artwork that could only have been made with intense collaboration. But have you thought about collaborating in other ways with other people? Because it seems to me that what you do, it's you, it's your thing.
It is. I think it's funny I'm on this panel because what I do is, well, I think being an artist is intensely individualistic in a sense because you're moving into your own imagination, you know. But then we work at a meta level, I believe, to try and communicate with people. Well, you know, imagination. Sorry, I'm not making any sense.
But there are different art forms.
Yeah.
If you think about filmmaking, it's obviously a massive communal effort. It requires lots of different people with different skills.
Yeah. Whereas
what you do, you can do by yourself. But some artists do choose to collaborate with others.
I think collaboration's really difficult, to be honest with you. I'm a control freak. I really want to be in control of what I'm doing. I don't want anyone else's input unless I ask for it. That being said, I am very open to other people's input, in particular my mother's. I often edit things and will show her. She's an artist herself, and I have a great deal of respect for her and her critical insights. So often I'll just get her feedback. I don't know if you'd term it collaboration, but definitely an openness. Yeah.
All right, we'll pause again for more questions from the floor. Brief reminder, questions rather than showing off. I'm a broadcaster, so you can leave the wanky stuff to me. I've got it in hand. Be brilliant, not too brilliant. Be concise. Other people have questions too. And, oh God, I can't see a thing. There's somebody there.
Yeah, how has the internet changed video art and like the collaboration aspect of, things like YouTube, for instance, and the exposure of artists?
Really interesting question. I do think about this a lot, especially when I walk around galleries looking at video art. I think the audience for, I think the context of the internet is very different from that of the gallery. I think people have a very short attention span. They're often distracting themselves from work or, study, that kind of thing. And I think the gallery remains a very, if you like, sacred space where people slow down and properly pay attention to works in a very different way. So I was once concerned that YouTube, etc., could potentially kill video art, but I actually think they're two very different things.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I could see one up the back.
Hi, this is a question for the whole panel. In what ways do you promote creativity? In a sense, are we now in an age where creativity is dying with new medium, video, instead of our own minds, poetry, lyrics and literature as before? So in what ways do you promote creativity between young people and older people?
Do you want to start with that one, Jane?
Me? Yeah, sure. Well, I think I'm quite unpopular with my students at some points in the semester where I might force them to sort of start to use their creativity with some of these things we might call wicked problems in design, where you don't necessarily have all the answers given to you, so it's not a neat problem that you can easily solve. And we're obviously quite open to... Oh, I've been cut off. Oh, there we are. Whether what the answers to that problem might be, what they might look like, how they might be presented to us. Oh, I'm cut off again. How they might be presented to us, and that allows, or if not forces, our students to really start to think outside the box, and they can find it really frustrating because they want you to nail it down to exactly what it should be and give you all the details, especially in education these days. In other areas is often very, it's made very important that things should be very explicit, and I don't think that's possible when you're teaching something like design. So I think it can be challenging, but hopefully that provokes my students into developing creative approaches.
Alan?
To me, being creative is approaching something in an unconstrained way. And I think the best way to encourage creativity is to give a person or a group of people an objective, give them the tools and let them go for it. Don't set limits.
Tom?
I think the best way to create, for me specifically, I suppose, to encourage creativity is to encourage people to just do it. If they've got an idea, often people think, oh, I have no idea what the next step is. And pretty much everything I've ever done in my life, I have no idea what the next logical step would be. But at some point, you've just got to start doing it. And I think that's a really important sense of sort of audacity that is behind most creativity.
Anastasia?
Well, I try to make great art because I believe encountering a great work of art actually inspires people to think differently, whether you call it creativity or a broadening of the imagination or an increased sensitivity and a sense that the artist has noticed something that you had otherwise been blind to, but it really rings true. This is what I attempt to do. I don't always succeed, unfortunately. Just something Alan said about no limits. I actually find personally that working within limitations produces creativity in a strange way because you're forced to be really imaginative.
Yeah, I think Alan said have limits.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Limits is a good thing, which I think is why I choose to work with such low-tech media, because it really forces me to clarify my ideas and, defy the odds, as it were.
Yeah, I can see that. All right, let's have another one. There is another one down the back as well that I noticed behind. Yes. I will have one more after that.
Thank you. This question's for Anastasia. Do you take feedback from your mother because she's your mother or because she's an artist? Because I sometimes wonder what is an artist. I think, maybe all are creative in our own ways. And
maybe yes. I don't think I could define what an artist is. I mean, I guess it's always open to interpretation, and it would sound incredibly arrogant on my behalf. I listen to my mother. Well, I love my mother, obviously, she's my mother, but she's a great artist. And when we're talking about my work, or her work, we listen to each other in that capacity as artists talking to each other, as contemporaries communicating,
Now, I think there was another one, but yes, there is.
My question is for the whole panel. I'm wondering, from an educational point of view, what are you considering inhibitors in promoting creativity? Because education is a very big organisation that moves very slowly, that's my point of view, behind what is happening. But perhaps you've got specific things that you consider are inhibitors in education, in promoting creativity?
Tom, you've sort of talked about this already, I think, but go ahead.
Yeah, so I think it's a great question, and I think there's a huge number of inhibitors to creativity in the education space. And as I mentioned, I think these kind of outdated notions of grouping people by when they're born is one of them. I think sort of mandating certain classes is certainly another. I think the way we report on education is another as well. You know, my mother's a teacher, actually, relating back to the previous question, and I really hope she's not watching now, because when I wrote that article, I was trying to make the point as well that I think one of the greatest roadblocks has actually been the teachers' unions in Australia. I think they're one of the most easy to strike unions against change, and you know, one of the measures that recently they've quite strongly disagreed with is performance-based reporting for teachers, which strikes me as a sort of sense of innovation within the system that's across the rest of society. So I think there's a whole range within education, and I think we can particularly learn from countries like the United States, where the system might be really, really bad in some places, but it's also got a huge sense of innovation in others, because in some ways it's treated like a business, and that can have very bad impacts, but it can also cause a lot of new ideas.
You're the educator here.
I think in fashion design, one major inhibitor to people students actually engaging with creative process is that there's a lot of people doing some very average things out there and not questioning the norm and making a hell of a lot of money out of it. So they sort of look to some of these products and think, well, why would I challenge the boundaries? And we're talking about the creative consumer before, and the fact that some people that may not even have studied may be getting into some of these creative fields and making products. And I think that the answer for me is that I try and talk to the students about the fact that a truly innovative designer doesn't just give people what they want, but gives them what they didn't know they ever wanted. So they're the people driving change and bringing radically different things into the market. So hopefully in that way they think about using creativity.
What do you think, Alan?
From the age of 3 or 4, you're sent to preschool. From 5, you're sent to primary school. From about 12, sent to high school, and then 18 to university. And there's a culture of expectation that young people, children, should be educated and should be educated in a certain way. And I think that's probably the big inhibitor, in that there's a mindset, there's a set structure. And a 5-year-old can't give feedback. They can protest about going to school and having to go to school, but they can't challenge, why do I need to do mathematics and what can I do about it? They don't have the capacity to do that. And when you're sort of in that system from 5 to, if you do university, to your early 20s, you do come out with a certain mindset, and you come out with a certain set of skills that may not enable you to fulfill your creative potential. And sort of going back to the point I made earlier, that you shouldn't see education as getting a certificate, as getting a degree. It's a process of learning. And you sort of read a book and you sort of try and learn from it, and not just say, look, I've read a book, I need to write a book review. So I think getting young people to think beyond the classroom, but also thinking beyond education as something that they have to do, that their parents feel is a good thing for them, but as something that they should have a stake in as well, and also be able to choose what they want to learn.
Can I say something first? I'll come to you and take Anastasia. But I find that really interesting, because you're obviously of immigrant culture. So, and immigrants in Australia have been essentially tremendously successful through education. Every wave of immigrants have been encouraged by their parents to study hard at school and go well.
Yep.
And it's been really a great success story, but it's obviously some of those kids have had to work really, really hard.
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't even want to.
Yeah. Well, thankfully, sort of studying in Australia and growing up in Australia, we were fortunate in the sense that we were exposed to this particular education system as compared to some countries in Asia and also around the world. The education system is much more rigorous and sort of rote learning based, whereas here we did have art and music and so on in primary school and high school and so on. I think education is an enabler. It's allowed people who come from poor, low socioeconomic background, who come from a refugee background, who are migrants, to, in a way, get to a point where they can compete with people who can find a job based on what they've learnt and so on. And you're right. I think that for migrants, education is sort of seen as a balance and as a way of fulfilling, I guess, a parent's set of dreams for a child.
I'll come to you, Anastasia. I just want to echo that. I wasn't really going to offer my opinions on this, but I do think it's enormously important that all kids are exposed to art and to music. We know that this pays off in other ways for them. So as much as possible, I'd also like to see our kids do a bit of proper language learning, but that's just me. And I don't see why they have to do homework when they're in the first few years of school. I don't see the benefit of it. I've made my children do it. Anastasia.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on this question about the inhibitors in education. I know from personal experience going through art school that it can be a very harrowing time for young artists because teachers can make you doubt yourself and you can think, what am I doing? Is it a pile of crap? Am I any good? So many difficult questions, so much deep self-doubt. I would say to you all, if you're out there, to just believe in yourself and keep going, because personally I had many arguments with my teachers. They didn't always agree with what I was doing, but I did it anyway. And that's what you have to do. And if education could do anything, it is to foster a spirit of criticality and independence, which is very important.
I am conscious of the time, so I'm going to move on now. And in fact, I'm going to truncate what I was about to do, because I want to ask all of you about optimism. And I'm going to start with, and I'm really interested in optimism personally, because I've had to learn to be one. I'm not a natural optimist. I'm more like Woody Allen. But I also think that it's really important as a parent to try and be as optimistic as possible, because I just think it's not good to be raised by a pessimist. So I'm much better at it, but it's been a learned behaviour. So you first, Anastasia, because your work has been described as the aesthetic of the pathetic.
But in the pathetic is transcendence, I believe, I hope. I think in my work there's a spirit of triumph, I hope. Again, I hope. And I think it would just be terrible if I was, moaning and groaning and who cares, so what? The point is to transcend one's problems and to impart that kind of the spirit of triumph. Yeah.
Tom, you started a think tank with no money and no idea. You must be very optimistic.
Extremely optimistic. I think on all the issues when people say, are you optimistic for the future? I say, of course, we've got no other choice. We've got to be optimistic.
Alan?
The average life expectancy for a man is about 60, 70, and sort of being in my 20s now, to be pessimistic and cynical for 50 years is a...
It's a lot more than that, can I just say? It's more than that.
I think sort of in my line of work and sort of working in health and with people who are sick and who are sort of in unfortunate circumstances are sort of dying, it's impossible not to be optimistic because you have to be for them and you have to be for yourself as well. Otherwise, work would become impossible. And I think also outside of work, a lot of the stuff that I do, a lot of my commitments outside of work let me channel a lot of the energy that I need, and sort of working with young people, working with people who are not constrained in their worldview, who aren't, who still have that idealism. I think really, really energizes me as well, and probably is one of the few things that keeps me going. Because it's quite taxing to do so many hour weeks in a hospital, and just to have that outlet is quite good.
And Jane, no pressure to be profound or anything.
I absolutely agree with Alan. You couldn't possibly not be optimistic in my line of work, having such bright-eyed, bushy-tailed creatives coming through every day, and their enthusiasm to get out there and actually make a difference and make themselves heard is absolutely inspiring and very infectious. So I'm absolutely optimistic about the future.
I think that's a great note to wrap this up, actually. So I'm going to say all their names. Please save your huge applause until I've done all of them. They have been wonderful. Jane Morley from the Queensland University of Technology, Alan Huynh, community activist, shining advertisement for Multicultural Australia, and Doctor, the youngest foreign policy analyst and think tank founder in the country, Tom Woodruff, and Alan Bolt's my favourite artist, Anastasia Close. Andrew Bolt's favourite artist, Anastasia Close.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Is that it?
Great. Thank you. You were terrific. Thank you.
Yeah, let's go. Let's go to the back room. It's great.
You were great.